To communicate effectively, we all have to master the art of listening to understand rather than just listening to respond. To communicate effectively, we all have to master the art of listening to understand rather than just listening to respond. Now, I remember as a young salesperson being taught about open-ended questions and closed questions. And we all know today that an open-ended question simply means you get an interesting answer. A closed question means it's a yes or a no answer. Nothing wrong with closed questions, they've got their place, but by and large, if we really want to get information, we need open-ended questions. So I went on a course and we learned all about open-ended questions, and I prided myself on the good open-ended questions that I was producing. My instructor told me he was very happy with them, and then we had to do a role play. So I started my role play, and I had 5 very carefully worked out open-ended questions to ask the client. The person taking the role play call sat down, and I started with my first question. He went on and explained a good answer to my question, and I was very happy with it. Listened very carefully, and then I moved on to my next question. Same thing happened. I sat back, listened intently to what he had to say, and moved on to my next question. After about 5 minutes, I had run out of questions. So I said to the person taking the call, "Thank you so much for the time that I've spent with you today. It's really been interesting. Could I make another appointment to come and see you at another time to take it to the next level?" He said, "Well, what would you be wanting to come and see me about when you take it to the next level?" I said, "Well, I'd then like to find out more about your business." And he said to me, "Well, why don't you do that right now?" And I panicked. I said, "Well, because I ran out of my 5 questions." I had worked out my very carefully worded 5 questions. He answered them very well for me, but I came to the end of it, and that was the end of my 5 minutes, and I had nothing more to do. So what went wrong here? So if we analyze what went wrong, I'm not sure that I was listening to the answers. I was asking good open-ended questions, and he was endeavoring to explain the answers to those, but I wasn't carefully listening to understand what he was telling me. All I was doing was thinking about my next question while he was answering my first question. Now, I think we can all relate to situations where we've done exactly that. So after the 5 minutes, my time had run out and I had nothing more to talk about. So what listening to understand is all about is when you ask that question and you get the detailed answer, to listen carefully to what's being said so that your next question can be based on what you've just heard, not what's written down on your piece of paper to ask. And that's the difference between listening to respond or listening to understand. Listening to understand is all about basing your next question on what you have just heard. So we can liken that to what we call the listening staircase. If we imagine a question being asked and then we get the answer, we now pause and we wait and think through what we've just heard, and we base our next question on what we've just heard. Ask the question, get the answer, and while the person's talking, think about what that person is telling you so that you base your next question on what you have just heard. We call that the listening staircase. There's another common word that we use for that. It's called talking. When you talk, that's exactly what you do. You speak, people answer, you inquire further, you probe a bit about what they've said, and that's what communication is all about. We do it very naturally when we are talking. But the moment we get into a business situation where we have to think about open-ended questions, we get ourselves into a state of confusion and we forget the basics. So let's get into the habit of asking the question, listening intently to that answer, and by doing that, you actually base your next question on what you've just heard. You go down that listening staircase, and at the bottom of that staircase is the proverbial pot of gold. That is the understanding that you are trying to gain from that conversation. So we converse in that way, then we're effectively going to be listening to understand, not listening to respond. the net result is that you'll have an understanding of what you are trying to find out about. If you don't do that, you're merely going to respond to them and you're going to walk away not having moved the ball forward in the slightest. So if we want to understand the people that we're interacting with, we must get into the habit of that listening staircase, listening to understand, not listening to respond.